Thank you very much for having us today. Yermolai, you're the son of a prominent Russian writer, Nobel Literature Prize winner Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about your father?
And I guess now we're at the 90th anniversary of his birth, and of course he passed away rather recently, really. I mean, it was in August. So I've been thinking a lot about actually my father over the last few months. I think of the inner firmness and dedication to living a life of saying what he believed to be true, regardless of what the surrounding circumstances dictated, regardless of the pressure that was around. I think of this kind of resoluteness and faith to the objectives that he had, and kind of a non-wavering resoluteness, I guess, is what I think of first.
Now, if there is one thing, or rather maybe one character trait that identifies you as your father's son, what would it be?
Maybe it is a interest in the surrounding world, society, interest in the way, and kind of concern for the way that the country develops, concern for the way our society develops. So kind of a bit of a, I guess, the feeling of civic duty.
Well, what was it like growing up in immigration?
For my parents, it was quite hard. I mean, again, my father was 55 when he had to leave Russia. At 55, your life habits are long since formed. And therefore, I think that this was the dominant theme for them. I mean, it was hard to be away from home. What kept them going was always a belief that they can do something useful for the homeland, and ability to keep in touch with some people in Russia. And amazingly for my father, a belief that actually, even physically, not just in his books, he would one day return. For me, I would say that the word immigration is probably not the most suitable, because again, I basically began to enter conscious, life already outside of Russia.
Now, I read somewhere that you actually learned your mother tongue Russian from poems. What kind of poems were they?
Not only from poems. We learned Russian through several ways. Of course, first of all, I, for example, only started speaking English, or being exposed almost to English, when I was already, 7 years old. So the language before that was always Russian, being at home. So that was there. Also, my mother, quite formally, actually taught us to read and write, and especially the reading was maybe more simpler, but we would sit and write. One of the things we also did as part of lessons was to learn poems, and this was a cross of Lermontov and Pushkin and Blok.
Now, what kind of father was he? I mean, what made him different from other fathers, except the fact that instead of fairy tales, he read you guys, his work, The Soul and the Barbed Wire, which he wrote when he was arrested in a Soviet labor camp.
He was a wise father. I was the first child that he had, and already then he was 52. Therefore, he really had the benefit of quite many years of experience, not just given the amazing biography he had, but also just those years of human life. He was a intellectually involved father. The way he mostly interacted with us and me was never around something, I would say, frivolous, or just spending time. So he was a wise, a suggesting, not a dictating father, and a very kind, a very kind person. I mean, in general, if you think about his life, he really had to care a lot about people, to pile on oneself all of the, let's say, discomforts of challenging the Soviet regime. It's an amazing degree of actually caring about people and caring about one's country. Because, I sometimes think that one of the bravest choices he made was when he could have, in the 60s, after a certain degree of recognition and the publication of One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, officially by the state, he could have decided that, it looks like I made it. I should, in the jargon, play along. The fact that he chose to actually intensify and escalate essentially the opposition to the regime, knowing all of the discomforts this would bring, was a choice that only a person really putting, let's say, others ahead of himself to an amazing degree makes. And so that, as a father, also, of course, he's also very interested. I even noticed the last few, months and just talking, he was always an engaged conversation partner. At age 89, even, he was an engaged conversation partner. I think quite often people, as they move into older age, begin to slip a little bit from, they begin to kind of retreat back into maybe their own self, become more absent-minded. It was quite impressive how his, let's say, care and interest in what's around, whether it's the country or the conversation partner, was always very strong and remained strong until his last days.
Now, from your observations, what was he experiencing when he was coming back to Russia after 20 years of immigration?
After 20 years of absence from Russia, I think there were several emotions that were mixed together. On the one hand, there was a real inflow of energy. I mean, the amount of moving around and walking and talking at the different meetings and signing books at a man of 75 who's been through his life of, through war and camps and cancer, it was quite amazing. It was more, let's say, I saw him much more energized at that moment than even several months before in Vermont. We would have in each of the cities that we stopped along the way, he would try to have a talk, which usually was about, an hour or so, and then he would sign books for every single person who wanted to get this book signed. And also he had a rule, when he signed, he never just signed, he would always write to whom. And sometimes these book signings were spontaneous, they weren't announced as book signings, lasted an hour and a half, 2 hours, and the longest one was 3 hours. So there was this tremendous, let's say, energy and of this whole, let's say, trip across. There was some disappointment. There was disappointment, which he spoke much about, around several things. Around one is that, that the economy and the society were in such collapse after the long Soviet period, which was obviously so hard. It was disappointment that there was such a long road of recovery ahead. And I think those were the two emotions that combined. So on the one hand, this joy at being home, which also translated through, for example, the fact that he started after a break of several decades writing again in the short story format, which he hadn't when he was in the West. Somehow, some of the impressions that he saw around Russia, I think, helped him do that. And a concern and a concern about what where the country is developing, how it's going to essentially continue its climb out of the very depressed state where we found ourselves at the end of the 20th century.
What was it telling you about your homeland when you were a kid while you were growing up in a foreign country?
Mostly what I remember him saying were, I think, two things. One, it is very important not to confuse Russia and the Soviet Union, and Russia and the Russian people and the communist rulers. And that he always paid a lot of attention to the loose use of terminology in the West, and would always correct people when they kind of said, the Russian communist state is attacking everybody, because people would lump together the Russianness, the government, the people. And so that was one thing that he always repeated, that the people are actually oppressed by the state. And the state is, we have to make that distinction between Soviet and Russian. And the other thing he always said, I really hope that you will go back to Russia, even one day. Who knows how life will be, who knows when, but what would make me happy is if you end up doing something that is useful for Russia.
What kind of books was he reading towards the end of his life?
He was reading articles and research that people in various kind of scientific and literary journals about Russia, about Russian culture, about Russian history, about what are the key choices going forward for Russia. He was quite remained interested, as I say, to the last day about what awaits Russia. This continued to interest him, and he would read about this. He would also read literature, also, and various Russian literature, but he would read a lot of different things. He was almost to the end, actually, also writing.
Well, what do you think of Russia today and the future of Russia?
He's quite concerned about Russia today. He's concerned that there's such a decline, or in general, such a low state of the well-being of the people in Russia on average, of the difficult situation of the education system, health system. He was always very adamant that a healthy local system of local self-government is an important element of a healthy society, especially of such a large scale as Russia. He was concerned that Russia would be able to, let's say, fix a lot of the problems we have domestically going forward. I think he felt that there was more positive developments, let's say, on the international arena over the last decade than there was in the 90s. But for him, the primary, I would have to unfortunately say, the primary feeling, he was worried. He left anxious about what awaits Russia, and I think that he even had concerns of, will Russia, in another century exist in the shape and form as we know it today.
Was he working on something?
He was always working till the end. I mean, it was amazing, actually, and I'm very grateful that he, until the end, maintained a lucidity of mind. Physical frailty set in already for several years, but the lucidity of mind he kept. He was, one of the main things he was doing was actually going through the red wheel once more and doing some edits and some small changes and thinking about how he would read. Last day, I guess, actually, he actually was quite happy because a lot of work got done, and so that was his way, and he would continue to do that.
One word that could describe your father, what would it be?
Deep.
Thank you very much.